Now, I am joined today, my guest. His name is Bryan from the Starfish Alliance. We met at the Hand in Hand conference quite a few weeks ago. I was really interested in what he had to say. So I'm looking forward today to getting a little bit deeper into who he is and what the Starfish Alliance is all about. Good afternoon to you, Bryan.
Andy, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
You are very, very welcome. Let's just get through some of the really simple stuff and we can get to perhaps more exciting things. What's the Starfish Alliance all about as a really simple thing?
Well, the Starfish Alliance, we essentially host camps for children who are in the care system, foster children, ages 6 to 12. It's 5 days. They're residentials where we take children who are in care. We put them in a setting that's completely safe. We work hard to maintain, the highest safeguarding standards as possible because we feel like kids can't have a good time if they're not having a safe time. And we position the camp not just to have fun, but to instill in them a sense of purpose and a sense of understanding that they've been created by God, and that they're loved by God. And we train our volunteers with trauma-informed methods of engaging and working with the kids. And we do all this through local churches. So that's why I paused when I said we host camps, because we really don't do the hosting. We train churches to do this in their communities. We don't say host a camp, in the Yorkshire Dales and then broadcast to everyone in the country, say, come to our camp. We help churches do these for their communities. So right now we've got 2 camps that are hosted by churches in South Wales. We've got a new one coming up in Portsmouth later on next year, and we're engaging with some new churches now to see about getting some other camps added to that. We started this. We did the first Starfish Kids Camp 10 years ago, and essentially we went national with it by taking our model and training other churches to do that. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
And of course, if you're helping other churches, then that's a really simple replication approach, because you're helping others to do stuff rather than having to be the hands and the feet. You're actually helping others be that, which means there can be more people.
Right. And it also makes us more sustainable, because rather than having to be a £1 million plus a year charity, we can keep our expenses down low because we don't pay for each individual camp. That's part of the training process for the churches. They go out and they engage their communities, businesses and individuals, and they raise funds to send these kids to camp. So yeah, it's kind of like a franchise. We say, think of McDonald's. There's the corporate brand, and then there's all these local McDonald's all over the country. And we have a vision someday to have Starfish Kids camps all across the UK. All with the same model, with the same high standards of safeguarding, and with the same care and devotion for these kids, because they've been through a lot. They've seen some very difficult things. A lot of them have been, shuffled from house to house and situation to situation, and we just want there to be one place where they know they're loved and they can experience new things and experience the love of God, and we want them to remember that it was a church that did it for them. So.
I love that. I remember when we were chatting at Hand in Hand, I just like the fact that you're not just doing something, you're actually encouraging and helping others to do that, which is one of those things. It makes me very happy when I see that, because a lot of churches will operate, well, this is my church, this is my area. I think this is very much more perhaps British, not sure about American. It's definitely not so common in Africa, but it's like, this is our area, this is our bit, these are our children, and we're going to do this over here. And we're not so good in the UK at saying, hey, let's work together, which of course is the heart of what you're saying you're doing.
Yeah. Well, essentially we're trying to tap into the church with a capital C. Ideally what you're describing is how the church should be working, right?
Yeah.
So we want to tap into that. And, we're not going to know every, I'm American, and we've lived in Wales for 15 years now. And I'm barely just now getting to understand how the valleys in Wales work. So there's no way that we're going to understand, the communities in Scotland, the communities in the north of England, in southeast England, in the boroughs of London. But the churches that are there, they're going to have their thumbs on the pulse of what's happening in their communities. And they're also, they are fixtures in those communities. So when those children grow up, when those foster carers, are needing a little bit of extra support, hopefully they'll remember that there is a church in that community that knows that community that they can connect with. So we think it's a good model. Sometimes it's difficult raising funds because people want to know. I want to send money to how many kids can I send to camp with my 100 pounds or whatever, and it's like, well, we don't send the kids to camp. We train churches to send the kids to camp. So sometimes it's a bit of a headache on my end, but that's okay. I'm willing to do that because I think it's a good model. So.
There are those things, aren't they, whatever you're doing in life, that you just have to think, hey, that's part of what we have to just be okay with sorting out, because that's going to happen every time. That's fine.
Yeah, this is who we are. Take us or leave us, but this is who we are. That's right.
You're talking a lot about faith and God and the children. Let's go right back in time for you. Where did faith enter your life as a child, perhaps, or was it a bit older?
Well, I didn't grow up in a family that went to church. I'm a corn-fed Kansas boy, right in the middle of the United States, where there's not much. Our neighbors were primarily cattle and wheat fields, and I was in a small town in the middle of Kansas, and like I said, my family didn't go to church. But for 1 year, when I was probably, I don't know, 12 or 13, my family just decided, right, my dad. I think my mom would have gone to a church, but she just never really did. But 1 year, my dad said, right, I want to start going to church. So we started just out of the blue going to this Presbyterian church. For about a year, we went almost every week until my dad's business got behind and he had to start working 6-7 days a week. And then they just never returned. Well, I kept going because even though this little town only had like 2,000 people in it in the middle of Kansas, and so there's not a lot of places where you can meet girls. So I kept going to church. I was just getting into high school years, getting to be around 13, 14 years old. And I thought, wow, there's some girls that are kind of cute here. I think I'll keep going to church. And that's a very shallow reason to go to church, by the way. But Jesus talks about teaching his disciples to be fishers of men. And I think God knows, if you've ever been fishing, there's certain types of bait that works and certain types of bait that doesn't work. And for me, that was a way to attract me. Sure, I went because of the girls, but even though I wouldn't say the church I was going to was particularly interested in evangelism or seeing souls won or anything like that, but I was around God stuff. And I was there for about 4 years, just going on weekends and going on some retreats and things like that. And then I was 18 years old, and the town I lived in had a small Christian college in it. And you probably know a lot about Christian music, I'm going to bet. And I'm going to go back a few years. Do you remember there was a band called Allies?
No.
Okay, so I don't know how much success they had over here, but they were a band, and they came and they did a concert, and they did an altar call at this rock concert, and all those 4 years of kind of, I guess by osmosis, being around God stuff, kind of culminated in that moment. And I went forward and I received the Lord, and and from that point on, it was just more and more of the, things didn't right away change for me, but it was just more and more of a, immersing myself, my interest in God stuff only increased from that point on. And it's been a journey. My wife laughs because, I am a pastor. We've been in church and mission work for 25 years. I'm not some of those, original 18 years of growing up in a family that didn't go to church. I'm still rough around the edges. God still is working on me, but he also uses those rough edges a bit. So that's me.
But the rough edges, the thing is, some of those rough edges do make for some interesting elements of our journey, I think.
Well, especially culturally, because culturally, when we first moved over here, there was some things that I had to, sorry, the ice cream man is going by. I don't know if you can hear that. Culturally, there's some things I had to learn coming over here. And some of them, especially as a minister, a preacher, a pastor, if you will, are quite embarrassing. if you learn them the hard way. You say things from the pulpit that would be fine in an American situation, but you're in Britain and you say things or you make a certain hand gesture emphasizing the second point of your message, and you can embarrass yourself. But other people, I don't think if you weren't as comfortable with those rough edges would be so embarrassed to talk about them, but it enables me to, not take myself so seriously and just relax a little bit and laugh. I think God gave us a sense of humor, and he gave us a lot of things to laugh about if we'll only look in the mirror for a while. So
I totally agree. I look at some of the things God's asked me to do in my life and think, there are probably a billion people who could be better at this than me. Like, what? Why me? And then, okay, you might realize that later on, but I think it's quite fun sometimes to see what it is that we think God should be doing rather than us. But that word "should," it's got a lot of guilt attached to it.
Yeah, sure.
So you move from Kansas. That's your upbringing. You come to the UK. I'm guessing, was it to come and lead a church over here?
Yeah, we came as church planters working with the Assembly of God churches in 2011. And we planted a church in Cardiff. And our model has been to, I knew we weren't coming over here to pastor a church for 35 years. We wanted to either plant churches or help churches grow. So we planted a church, and then we handed that off to local leadership a few years later. And then we took on a church in near Caerphilly in the southern part of Wales, which I call the gateway to the Welsh Valleys. And the little church with just a few people left, and they hadn't had a pastor for several years and probably would have closed in another couple of years. And we took that on, and God just pushed ahead and worked with those people to engage the community. And that church, Hope Church in Bedworth, is not Bedworth. Some people think I say Bedworth when I say that, but Bedworth has probably been the most enjoyable, healthy church I've ever been a part of, and just been a real joy. And we handed that church off in May of last year to our associate pastor, who came alongside us. Once again, just kind of that model of bringing someone alongside us and then handing it off. But by that time, by that time, Starfish we had, COVID had passed, which we knew wanted to nationalize Starfish in about 2019. And so once we kind of made that decision, this is what we're going to do, we established the charity, and then COVID hit and then put us on hold. But about 2022 or so, 23, we really kind of got our feet again and started, working hard to add more locations of camps. And we knew we had to step aside from our pastoral roles there. So now I'm full-time Starfish guy.
I want to get into Starfish, but I'm kind of curious. How did you find yourself coming from the US to a little church in Wales? What was the journey? I mean, I know you're obviously part of the AOG.
Yeah.
How did you end up coming from where you were to Wales?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try and hit the highlights for you. We were doing university ministry. We were at Kansas State University, working with students there. We were about 10 years we were there. And we had taken some of our students to a missions conference, where the idea was to get students to really consider giving a year of their time, like a gap year type thing, to a mission project, going overseas for a year, and to pray about a lifetime of being a missionary in another country. And we thought we were going to take some of our students, and God was going to do something in their hearts. And he did, but God did something in our hearts. And there was a moment where my wife and I had to split up. Our youngest son was just a baby at that time, and she had to go feed him, take care of him. She said, I'm going to go back up. This is a big conference center with a hotel and everything. She said, I'm going to go back up to the hotel room, and I'll meet you down here. And this breakout session that was talking about Europe and the need, with kind of the struggles that Europe as a continent was having with God and with church. So I'm walking down this long corridor into this ballroom where they're having this presentation about the need for the gospel in Europe. And I just stopped in the middle of the hallway, and I just something, it's hard to explain. I just had this deep, deep, deep grief for Europe. And I started weeping. And which I don't want to I don't want to hype it up. Sometimes, we Americans, we like to hype things up, especially when church stuff. And I don't mean to hype this up. And I'm not a real big weeper, but something happened in that hallway. I can't deny it. And I just felt this overwhelming burden for the gospel in Europe. So I kind of came to my senses and continued down the hallway, went into the program, experienced the program. And then when it was over, I was walking back out the same way. And my wife came. She'd come up pushing the pram with my son in it. She comes up, said, well, what'd you think? And I was like, that's pretty good. I said, what did you think? She goes, well, program was all right. But she goes, I got to tell you, something happened to me while I was walking down this corridor. And she explained the exact same experience that I had had. Just stopped with this deep grief for the gospel in Europe and weeping and tears. And so we had the exact same experience. So we're not the type of people to just have a goosebump experience and then pack up our family and move across the ocean. So we just kind of filed it, knowing that God was at work somehow. The next year, we had a student from London come as an exchange student at Kansas State University. She was an atheist, but she got involved with our campus ministry. Had some friends in there, started coming, enjoying the songs we sang, etc. Gave her heart to the Lord. We baptized her. And then at the end of that year, she went back to London and she's like, help me find a church. What kind of church am I looking for? So that experience kind of got us thinking, is like, well, we thought, because I had spent a little time in Spain and I spoke a little Spanish, I thought, well, God's going to send us to Spain. This experience with this young lady got us thinking, like, well, maybe we could be, part of building a strong church in the UK. And there's lots of amazing things happening now in the UK, have been for several years. But just God was speaking to us about being a part of that. And we made a trip to the UK to visit the student and sat down with. We're a part of the Assemblies of God over there. We're now a part of the Assemblies of God missions organization, and they work in partnership with the Assemblies of God here in the UK. And sat down with the leadership over here and said, "Hey, we just feel like God's sending us here. We don't know where. God says the UK, but we don't know where. So where do you want us? Where do you need us? Where is it?" And they said, "South Wales. We could really use some help. South Wales." It's like, okay, and after that, we came back. We, changed our direction ministerially and started preparations for coming to the UK. And in June of 2011, my wife and I and 4 tired little kids rolled off of an airplane in Cardiff Airport, and and have suffered from vitamin D deficiency ever since. So.
One of my favorite stories, some folks came from the US. They came to stay with some people I knew in Shropshire, which isn't far from Wales. And then it took them on a little bit of a road trip just during the day, 3-4 hours or something, have a coffee somewhere. And this is, the thing that amazes us about the UK, everywhere is so beautiful and lush and green. Like, how is it? It's not even, it never rains here. And their eyebrows raised as they said, no, it really does. This is probably the only day it's not rained for months. That's why we have lots of green, lush grass, because there's lots of rain.
Well, the funny thing is, here on my setup, you and I, before we went on air, we're talking about lighting, trying to fix some lighting things. And I have pretty good lighting here. And part of that reason is because I have this, I guess officially it's an LED thing for people who do like little videos and reels and podcasts and stuff. But secretly it's my don't get depressed winter vitamin D deficiency light. And that helps me a little bit. So we've been here long enough to know that this is what people talk about, is the weather. We commiserate about the weather, and we in Wales, every time we hear someone from England complain about the complain about the rain and the lack of sunlight, we just look at each other and roll our eyes, because it's not as bad as it is in Wales. Nope. And so yeah, I mean, as you can tell, I haven't picked up any of the Welsh accent. but I am able to pronounce some Welsh cities and villages and street names, and I can commiserate about the weather. So I'm partially Welsh.
You see, if you can converse about weather, that's you're basically British. But people
Yeah,
think, "Why are you
yeah,
talking about weather all the time?" You have no idea what we have to go through in a day. You go out
yeah,
in shorts and sandals, you come back with hypothermia in your winter gear, and everyone thinks that's weird. No, that's
yeah,
just a Tuesday afternoon.
yeah. And the other thing is, we used to look when we first moved here. We used to look down, not look down, but look at British people when they ate beans on toast and thought, "You are crazy. You're absolutely crazy." Because in my world, that's what hobos under a bridge eat. You crack open a tin of beans and then you eat it and maybe have a piece of bread or whatever. When we went back for the first time with my family and we actually craved beans on toast, and the beans over there aren't the same, and we were like, this is ridiculous. The world cannot go on because America does not have the right kind of beans. And then my family, when we started, we'd have like jack of potatoes and with beans and cheese and tuna and all that stuff, which Americans think is just crazy, but it is amazingly delicious in a kind of a depressing way.
Yeah, jacket potato, cheese and tuna. That's kind of twice a day, twice a week here.
I don't know how much time we have here.
But those, don't worry.
Okay. I saw, used to be when we were at our church in Cardiff, we would have church in the evenings because we would share a church building with a Baptist chapel, and we would have church in the evenings. And sometimes we would go to someone's house and we would just do takeaway, like, hey, go buy your favorite takeaway and we'll meet at so and so's house and we'll have a meal. And one young lady, this was her house we were meeting at. So people came and we had pizza, we had kebabs, we had all this stuff. She just, she just heated up some beans and, toasted some bread, and then she put the beans in a little cheese and whatnot, and she made beans on toast. I saw her walk through this room with this plate of beans on toast. Every other British person in that room who had the pizza, who had the kebab, who had the Indian, set it down, and their eyes fixed on that plate as it walked through the room like hyenas eyeing, some sort of prey that's just wandered into their pack. And I thought, this is a very unique culture. Very unique culture.
I'll second that. Let's get back into Starfish then.
It's fun talking about beans on toast, Andy. I mean,
I could talk all day about food. It's not asked by presenters. Food, we're off.
Yeah.
Where did Starfish come from? What was the heart and vision? Where did it?
That's a good question. In our church in Kansas, we did this camp for children in foster care called Royal Family Kids Camp. And it was a great thing. I mean, not only was it great for the children that came, but it was transformational for the volunteers. I saw people who never engaged with church stuff. They'd come and they'd sit on the pew every week, and then as soon as church was over, they'd get up, they wouldn't say hello to anyone, and they'd leave. And I saw these people volunteer for 5 days to work with these kids, and it was transformational. They became deeper disciples. They became broken in a good way, and they just changed after these 5 days. And I thought, wow. And so when we became pastors and we started the church in Cardiff, we were looking for something that, I believe every church has the same mission. That's to see lost people saved, to see saved people grow, and to see communities changed for the better. And it was that last thing, changing communities or helping see change in communities. I thought, what can we do in Cardiff that's not already being done by other churches and other organizations? If someone wants to help with food bank, great. Here's churches down the street, they're doing food bank, you go help them. But what can our church do to be a part of the solution? And I remembered this Royal Family Kids Camp. And I thought, well, I remember it was transformational, not only for the kids that came, but also for the churches. And I thought, well, that's an amazing thing. So we said, we can just look into doing that. And now Royal Family Kids Camp is part of an organization called For the Children in the States. There's over 200 of these camps in the United States. And they're called Royal Family because the idea is that children are the sons and daughters of the Most High King, and they're royal. And when they come to camp, we want to treat them royally, like they deserve. We want these kids have been, a lot of them have seen neglect, and they're in a system that's trying to help them, but it's very impersonal. And so they treat these kids like royalty. Well, we came and we thought, right, we're going to do this. we didn't have, we sat down and did some planning. We realized we wanted to have about 25 kids. We had no relationships with social services whatsoever. Okay. So that was one problem. Another problem was, in order to staff this correctly, to have enough for safeguarding and for all the activities, we needed at least 40 adults. Our little church plant didn't have 40 adult people in it. And the third problem was, of course, money. We needed more money to do a week of camp than we had in our annual budget for church, little church plant. But we just really felt, I mean, our own church people said, we think you're crazy. Well, not crazy. They just said, we think, it was a nice way of saying we're crazy. They said, we think maybe this vision is too big for us as a church. And my wife and I responded, we're like, well, maybe it is. And maybe we're crazy, but we're just we feel like this is what God wants us to do. And if it's not, then we'll learn and we'll move on to something else. We pushed forward. We met with social services in Cardiff County. And they kind of said, not really a thing that we do here. Thanks, but no thanks. A lot of people told us it couldn't be done. This is an American idea. It's not going to work here. 2016, 10 years ago, we had our first RFK UK camp. We had 23 kids. We had 47 volunteers, and we had money left over in the bank after we paid all of our bills, and we didn't have to touch our church budget. And after that first year, we had social services asking if they could send more kids. And so we knew it was a great thing. At that point, we needed to figure out what we're going to call it, because we knew we couldn't continue calling it Royal Family Kids Camp, because we got to raise money for this, and no one wants to send money to help the Royal Family kids go to summer camp. So we thought we'll change it. We did ask the Queen. We wrote a letter to Queen Elizabeth and asked her if we could use that and she, of course, politely said no. And well, she said it wasn't her decision. She said that was Parliament's decision, and Parliament said that's not our decision. That's the Queen's decision. So I took that as what it was. Like, this is never going to happen. Plus, it's probably a better thing anyway. It would have been too confusing for people. But we changed the name to Starfish after that story about the boy throwing starfish back in the ocean, and how there's thousands of them and how it wasn't going to make a difference. And he says, well, it makes a difference for that one that I just threw back. So, and it took, and that's, the rest is, I would say it's history, but it's history in the making. We're still making it.
I love that history in the making. I also love the idea that the church folk says, oh no, this is too big a vision for us. Because there's a phrase, and maybe you've heard this before, but it's about the fact that the only limitation to us is our own vision and how small we can think something can be. But actually, God's abilities are far outside anything that we can even imagine. So the biggest visions for us, for God, it's easy.
Yeah. And one thing I learned coming over here was how much of my successes and my failures were due to my own self, for one thing, but also because of my culture. I mean, I'm American. I always will be, and I may learn to like beans on toast, but I'm still an American deep down, and that American culture has shaped me. And the same, for British culture. And as a church, we need to be cognizant of what it is in our culture that helps us, but also what it is in our culture that hinders us. Mm. And if I may, I think, and I tread carefully here because I have so much respect and love for the British culture, but I think one thing where it affects the church is this extreme aversion to risk.
Yes.
We joke about, health and safety culture in Britain, and we have a good time joking about it and complaining about it. But if we take a moment to consider it seriously, faith is all about risk. And if a church is afraid to take a risk, then they're not going to be very successful in stepping out and spending the one currency that God asks us to spend with him. And that's faith. And we all learn this. We all have different levels. Some of us are ready to jump off a bridge and think God will let us fly. And other people, are, their risk threshold is quite a bit less. but regardless of what that is, sometimes God calls us to step out, like that song Oceans. I probably overheard that song, but you called me out beyond the waters. You've called me out here, and God is calling the church, especially in these days, to step out in territory where fear may get us, doubt may get us, but He calls us to take risks. Sorry, that's my little preach. But it's very relevant to where we were, because we were getting fearful because so many people told us it couldn't be done. And we were just foolish enough to just keep pushing forward with it. And it wasn't our bravery. It wasn't, sure, in America, we kind of have this independent, get her done kind of attitude, but we were very fearful that maybe we are crazy. But God honored it, and God honored it for us and for our church. So
I would go further. I was chatting with a guy, Brendan Prince. He runs a charity called Above Water, which is about water safety, basically, in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about risk. And he said the problem is, as a culture, we're real risk averse.
Yeah.
We want everything, all our ducks in a row. It's going to be nice and neat. And then once we know it's all safe, then we can consider it. And actually, he's about to set another world record canoeing around the British Isles. And folk have said to him, well, you're crazy, you're mad. So that's a huge risk. And when he set world records for stand-up paddleboarding, he was talking about the same thing. People said, you're mad, you're taking a massive risk. But he said, the thing is, it's not a risk because I know how to handle myself in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah, things can go wrong, but they are kind of measured risks. And the thing is, if you know the one who holds the measure,
yeah,
risks really aren't quite as severe as we might initially consider.
Mm. Yep. Yeah. I mean, there's a scene from a movie. Do you remember the Indiana Jones movies?
Yes.
The Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Do you remember that movie?
Yes, yes.
And when they're in the temple and he's got all that maze of booby traps to navigate, and there's that one called the Step of Faith.
Yeah.
And I just remember that, just watching it when I was a kid. I still remember it so clearly, when he just shuts his eyes, lifts a leg, and then leans forward. And then all of a sudden, when the angle changes of the camera, you see this illusion that looked like there was nothing there, but there was indeed a bridge there. And I thought, that preaches. I mean, that is like, sometimes we have to take that step and just close our eyes. We don't want to be foolish. I don't think God calls us to be foolish, but when He's calling us to do something, He wants us to step out and do that. And I think the church, in Britain is getting better at that. But that is one thing that the church all over the world needs to be ready to take great steps of faith for God in order to accomplish great things.
I think part of that is we look far too much behind us. We look at what we've accomplished, and therefore we need to protect, rather than the reason there was something is because someone back there actually took a risk for that very thing that we're looking at. Whether it's a church building, I grew up in a church where the Baptist church, all the congregation members have been asked, right, we want you all to take out a loan of, I don't know, £500, £1,000, whatever it was, 80 years ago, and they all took out a loan and they put this money together and they built a building. And the foyer, the entrance to this church, there's lots of little green bricks. Every green brick has one of the names of the original congregational members who put a loan into that church of what they could afford.
Yeah, yeah.
They took a risk. But as I say, when you know the one who's holding the measuring stick of risks, actually, it's not such a risk when you surrender a job or surrender a career or surrender your homeland.
Yeah. And especially because the work we do is with children. Okay, so I just had this conversation with someone yesterday about that verse. Was it in Malachi where God says, talking about the tithe, and He says, test me in these things, and see that I'll come through. And if God says, test me in like finances, how much more can we trust Him when it comes to things that are really, 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 really close to His heart, like children? And it's interesting because, right now we're engaging with churches all over the country. We're just trying to find churches that we can talk to about having camps in their communities. And oftentimes it's the larger churches that we have a harder time with but we talk to a large church, immediately they start thinking, okay, can we afford this in our budget? Do we have the people for this, to staff this?
Yeah.
Do I have someone who can, on my staff who can lead it? But it's the small to middle-sized churches, because they don't have all of those resources. They're like, if God doesn't do it, we're not going to be able to do it. So we'll step forward and trust God. Well, you do the math of heaven on that, and the math of heaven does not match up with our math a lot. So.
No, I love that, and it does make sense, because if you've got something you want to protect it. I remember I've shared this before. It was a big church, and they were the big church that was running the big food bank in this big city. And it was, I don't know, 60 grand a year or something they were spending on this thing. And then somebody says, oh, well, we think we should stop doing the food bank. We think God's now wanting us to do something different with that money. We think it's time for somebody else to do the food bank, because we've got another idea over here. And it caused all sorts of ripples of problems. But in the problems, a new food bank kind of grew.
Mm-hmm.
People took that on. The local council, which doesn't necessarily compute into Americans sometimes, but the local council, they said, well, we'll give you loads of money. We love this. We'll throw money at you, but you can't talk about Jesus. Yeah. And they were struggling with the finance, and they said, we're only doing this because of Jesus. We wouldn't be doing that unless that was the reason why. Yeah. So if you don't give us some money, we'll still be okay. And the people from the council were like, but we've got money. Just don't talk about Jesus. Yeah, but that's the reason we do this. That's the whole purpose. And God then provided with another car and another forklift truck and a bigger warehouse. And when we take that step of faith, which I know is especially well, that clip, I'll share why in a moment, that's when some amazing things can happen. I was on something called the PACE Project in 1995-6, which was a school's youth work project. And that very clip we use quite frequently to talk about how you step. How do you believe in somebody you can't see? Yeah. You might talk about the wind, and you can't see the wind, but you can see the effects of the wind. And well, you can't actually see God, but you can see the effects of God. And that was one of the analogies we used to use. And we would show that very clip because it was such a powerful illustration of you need to take that step. And when you take that step, you will see. But if you saw it before you took the step, it wouldn't be faith.
Yep. And plus, there's the changing of perspective too, where you start to see the bridge, and that preaches too. It's like if you just think about that, God's looking at this from a different perspective, and you can trust that perspective, So oftentimes, you remember being a little kid and riding in the backseat of the car and like, Dad, why aren't you going faster? Or Dad, why are you slowing down? And it's like, you can't even see over the dashboard and you're trying to tell your dad how to drive. What an apt analogy that is for God. We're trying to tell God how to direct things, and we don't have his perspective on things. So I think I want to make, it's important that I communicate this too, because, you talk about the reason why we do this is Jesus. We are a faith-based organization, and our curriculum, we tell Bible stories, we sing songs about faith and about God and all that kind of stuff. And people always ask, well, how does that happen? Because you're working with councils and things like that. We don't proselytize. We don't do altar calls. Our goal is not to make little converts, and send them back. Our goal is to just tell stories that inform kids that, they're worth a lot to God, and that they have value, and that there is a God who loves them, and that they're never alone. And, but we've had this conversation a lot. It's like, we could do the same thing if we didn't do a lot of the, religious stuff. And my response is, well, number one, I don't quite think we can, because I think there's something a little bit deeper and stronger when it's, when it's spiritual, when you're talking with kids, and not just, psychobabble and just, helping kids, understand how their brain works and things. But also, we believe in a God camp. Anyone can do a good camp. Anyone can get kids and take them to Butlins for a week and have a great time. But we believe that there is something of value. Children, we talk about their physical needs. We talk about their need for housing, for healthcare. They have spirits too, and we want to put Jesus as an option for their spirits. We don't push that on them. We don't make them listen or make them, respond in any way. But, this is who we are. And oftentimes we'll say to people, it's like, we don't make anyone come. we don't twist anyone's arm, and if they don't want to come, they don't have to. But we believe in the importance of what it is we're doing. And so, yeah, just like that, it's like there is a spiritual element to what we're doing, and we feel it's an important one.
I would concur. Starfish, you are doing this work with children. You are you're out there trying to help and encourage, as in equip churches so they can do what you have started, what you've seen in the States, and what you're seeing obviously replicated across the UK. How much do people need to get involved with this in order for this to function where they are?
Well, we work through churches, but we work when there's a new Starfish Kids Camp that is going to open up in an area. We usually have one church that will be kind of like the point person. That's our point of contact. That's our point of organization, and that's the church that we work through. Now, typically, there will be several other churches in that community that hear about it and want to come along and get involved, either maybe help with some finances, maybe they've got some potential volunteers, and that's usually what happens. But we'll work through the one church. That one church will need to send 2 or 3 people to our director's training. We have a training in August where it's 5 days of classroom training about trauma-informed practices, safeguarding, our camp philosophies and camp practices. And it's concurrent with a running camp, so they'll get to see camp and see how it functions in real time. And we usually encourage 2 or 3 people because it's a big project, and you need 2 or 3 people from a church. One person probably would be overwhelmed. And then after that, after our director's training, that's the first step. Then they go back, and usually once you go to the director's training, it's going to take probably 9 months to a year before you actually have a camp. You need to recruit volunteers. You need to find a venue to have your camp, because we do these at venues wherever the local, like we've got 2 Welsh camps, but both of them, they use venues over the border in England. So this is wherever the closest venue is that's appropriate for you. Raising funds, talking with community, and the whole time we're working with them. So we don't, we're partners in this the whole time. And, the cost, there's a good amount of money that needs to be raised. There's a good amount of recruiting that needs to do for volunteers, and they need to train the volunteers. We have a training program for them as well. So it is a big ask, but it needs to be, because you're talking not only, it's 5 days of program, which we've got it all planned out. We have templates and everything. So, you don't have to put together the schedules. You can adjust them however you need to, but we've got everything ready for you once you go to director's training. I was going to go somewhere and I forgot where I was going to go, it is a big ask. That's what I was talking about. And it, for the reason that it's a big program, but also because you're dealing with children. And anytime we're dealing with children, we need to be very careful with safeguarding. We have very robust safeguarding practices, policies, and procedures. And you have to have those when you're dealing with children in general. Think how much more we need to be even more on the ball when we're dealing with children who have seen abuse, who have experienced it for themselves, who have trust issues. Maybe a lot of them, maybe you have a little girl who's in care who never trusts an adult man because every adult man in her life has, proven themselves unworthy of her trust. So we have to overcome some of those issues as well. It's important. It's a big ask because it's a big job and it needs to be done well, but we've got it planned out for you. So if I could put in a little plug, if there's any churches across the UK that have a heart to help children in care, and we also work with adopted children because a lot of those children have come from care as well, have some of the same issues. We're looking for churches across the UK, Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland. We want to open new camps. We'd really like to get a camp in the London area. That's the highest concentration of children in care in the UK. And so we'd like to get a camp or 2 there. call us, get in touch with us, go to our website at www.starfish.org.uk and reach out to us. And I guarantee you'll get a free cup of coffee or cup of tea. We'll come to you and we'll have a chat and see what we can do to do some special things and help some children in your area.
Which is such an important part of what the church does. You look at the UK church going back hundreds of years. We set up the school system that we see today, the hospital system, probation service, and that's all been created by the churches. When you talk about big dreams, big visions, the church has started some phenomenally, insanely big organizations and institutions, and it's the church that got involved with it. So, although it might seem scary, actually, as you've been saying, it's small steps is how I would interpret what you're saying. It's not great to do a camp next week. You're going to fall over. But actually, years' time in preparation and training and all that sort of support, those little steps, they all add up to a bigger journey.
Yeah, definitely. When you think of, especially with this issue with children in care, of all the organizations, I mean, social services is overwhelmed. Our councils and local authorities can't keep up. And, look at all the organizations that do great work. Bernardo's, Home for Good, etc. That started out with faith elements, and some of them are still very strongly, faith-based organizations. But it's the church, and it's not, helping your community is part of the mission of Jesus. Now, we all want to see people come to faith. We all want to see people experience the life of Jesus Christ. But just offering a cup of cold water is part of the mission of Christ. And we can come alongside some of our local authorities. And granted, sometimes there's trust issues on either way. The church doesn't always want to trust the local authority and vice versa. But I believe that where the Venn diagram of the local authority and the church overlap, in that real estate where they overlap, a lot can be done for the greater good of society if we can just work hard. It's not going to be easy, but if we can just prove ourselves as valuable partners to those in government and the local authorities who are trying to help these things. I'm a firm believer in the local church. The local church is the engine room of societal change, and so I'm a big advocate for that.
I quite agree. Bryan, just give us your website once more if people want to get in touch with you.
www.starfish.org.uk.
Bryan, Starfish Kids, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. We're going to play some more music now, and I'll be back in a bit.